At this point in the book of Deuteronomy, the people of Israel are about to enter the promised land. Moses is speaking to the people, reaffirming the covenant between God and the people of Israel. Moses will not be going into the promised land with them, so it's a kind of farewell address by Moses that reminds them of the mighty acts of God in liberating them from slavery and accompanying them in the wilderness, acts that define their common life together and set them apart from other peoples. In the verses immediately following this passage from Deuteronomy, Moses is concerned about their entry into Canaan. It's the promised land, promised to their ancestors Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But they're going into a place of prosperity where they'll be tempted to forget the God of the Exodus and the wilderness journey. They will find great prosperity, fine large cities that they did not build, houses filled with all sorts of goods that they did not fill, hewn cisterns that they did not hew, vineyards and olive groves that they did not plant. Moses says to them, "When you have eaten your fill, take care that you do not forget the Lord, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery." How easy it is for us to think that we have constructed our own lives, our own worlds. I've worked pretty hard to get where I am. I deserve this. I earned it. If someone else is struggling or trying to survive, I might give them a little handout, but their struggles really are not my problem. Love God more than anything else, and love your neighbor as yourself. Someone has said that the world without these divine teachings would be a world with many gods and no neighbors. As followers of Jesus, we have to understand that before we could ever choose God, God has already chosen us. Before we can love God with heart, mind, and strength, God has already loved us, heart, mind, and soul. To love God is to be compelled to look at ourselves truthfully, honestly. Love your neighbor as yourself. Now, I can choose to love my neighbor, but I don't get to choose who my neighbor is. Remember the parable of the Good Samaritan. Now, to love in this way is not sentimentality. It's not just having warm feelings. Warm feelings may fade and disappear. Love God more than anything else means that we bring our whole selves into God's presence. To love God with every fiber of our being. It means to be loyal to God, even when that loyalty is costly, even when that loyalty is difficult. Deuteronomy instructs us to teach our children to love God and to love our neighbors. This kind of love requires a lifetime of training so that we can honestly name our self-centeredness and allow ourselves to be overwhelmed by the way God loves us. Love is a matter of heart. In Jewish tradition, the heart is not just the organ that pumps blood through our bodies. The heart is the throne of God's glory, the place where God dwells. When the heart is permeable to God's presence and mystery, we become compassionate and merciful. Compassion for all of God's creation, even the small and weak, even those parts of creation that we usually try to avoid. Compassion even for our enemies, those who would do us evil, even those who annoy us or who infuriate us or who bore us to tears. To be infused with God's presence is to be transformed, transfigured, made into something new, given a capacity for love that we would otherwise not be capable of. It means allowing the mercy and compassion of God to find a home in us so that mercy and compassion can radiate out from us. What does it mean to be permeated by God's love, God's compassion and mercy? Well, if Jesus is any example, love can be dangerous. Love can get us into trouble. In the mid-1960s, in the midst of the struggle against apartheid, the South African novelist and anti-apartheid activist Alan Paton wrote a small book of meditations on the prayer of St. Francis called Instrument of Thy Peace. You probably know the prayer, Lord, make us instruments of your peace. Alan Paton wrote about the challenges of following the way of love, especially when actively fighting against evil. He said, if a Christian takes seriously the commandment to love his neighbor as himself, he may incur the active hostility of state and church. And we should remember that Jesus did exactly that, and that he told his disciples that this might happen to them also. These sayings of Jesus should be taken seriously. Our Christian cause could well bring us into conflict with authority, and the only way in which we can overcome the fear of such a prospect is to believe that we are the instruments of God's peace, which means, of course, that we are the instruments of God's love. And because we are used to it, because it dwells in us, we have no cause for fear. So writes Alan Paton. There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear.